I had OCD and anxiety from a very young age, so from as long as I remember, from 6, I was having panic attacks. Harm-based OCD, sexual, intrusive thoughts, health anxiety, death anxiety, existential. There's not many themes I haven't had a bit of, and that set me off on a journey. When I built real acceptance for the difficulty I was going through and then started to focus in the present moment on building a new life and doing things that I never thought I would, like having a family and becoming a therapist and things like that, then the past did decrease. The function of compassion is not to answer the uncertainty or to get rid of the difficult thoughts, it's to build courage to face the difficulty and to move forward in life. I hope that I've done my small part in using my pain to help other people and to share what's been helpful for me and what I see helpful with other people that have recovered.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Get to Know OCD podcast. My name is Patrick McGrath. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. If you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, check out NOCD.com. And if you like the work that we're doing here with the Get to Know OCD show, well, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to NOCD on YouTube. I am here today with Jonny Say. Hi, Jonny.
Hi,
Jonny.
good to be here.
Tell everyone a little bit about you and the work you do in the world of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, so I'm a therapist based in the UK. I'm based in Cambridge, which is near London. And yeah, I work primarily online just now, so I'm sort of seeing people over Zoom. I'm part of a centre called the Integrative Center for OCD Therapy. So that's with Stuart Ralph, who everyone knows in this community. And yeah, I do 70% of my time there, 30% of my time in my private practice working with different anxiety disorders and different presentations. I have my own history of OCD, so yeah, that goes way back in my life. So that's part of the reason I've ended up down this pathway. And I am primarily working with ERP with quite an ACT focus, acceptance and commitment therapy focus, and then compassion focused therapy as well is a big part of what I do.
One thing that I hear a lot, especially around the ACT world, and since you say you do that, this is excellent timing, is the use of mindfulness in therapy. I think sometimes people get the idea that that means I need to sit and think of things until I've cleared it or something like that. But that's not mindfulness. What is mindfulness really, and how does it contribute to the overall help in a therapeutic setting?
Yeah, I think that mindfulness can be seen as this tool to control our mind, but in terms of acceptance and commitment therapy, one of the, I think it was John Hoffman said it's more like don't mindfulness, so like you don't mind to have stuff, which I thought was a really good way of putting it. So for me, it's been a tool to learn to be with the difficult thoughts and feelings and to not do compulsion, so very much part of OCD treatment. So for me as someone, I had a lot of mental compulsions when I was struggling with it, so it was almost a vital piece of the puzzle to learn to observe what was going on in my mind.
Okay.
But in terms of like a meditative practice, yeah, a lot of people I'm working with, we're not doing any meditation or anything like that. It's more the skills and the principles from mindfulness that inform the sort of ERP, because most people won't practice and don't want to sit and do, even 20 minutes a day of sort of targeted mindfulness practice. I definitely think that was important in my journey to have some time doing that, but now it's more integration of the principles into therapy.
And what are those principles?
Well, the primary principles we're probably talking about is this idea of cognitive diffusion, so the ability to observe my thoughts, to have some distance and detachment and not add further processing, further analysis, the ability to observe difficult feelings and to not react to them and to let them be there and to have a high degree of acceptance, and then the ability to control my attention so that I can focus on what really matters to me in my life. And then with ACT we have the values and the committed action part, which is very much the sort of behavior side of it. So we're combining mindfulness with behavioral therapy ideas really.
And for those then who might not be familiar with ACT, can you describe that for people as well?
Yeah, so acceptance and commitment therapy is often called a third wave CBT, third wave cognitive behavioral therapy. I believe Steve Hayes actually coined the term third wave therapy, and he was the sort of developer of ACT, of acceptance and commitment therapy. So it's really, like many third wave therapies, it's integrating mindfulness ideas into behavioral therapy. I guess, it came out of Steve Hayes' own experience of learning behavioral therapy and cognitive therapy, trying to apply that to his panic disorder and finding it wasn't so helpful over time, and then that an acceptance-based approach was really much more helpful for him with panic.
And you said you've got some lived experience in this. Have these been things you've applied then to your own lived experience?
Yeah. So I had OCD and anxiety from a very young age. So from as long as I remember, from 6, I was having panic attacks, and depersonalization was a big thing I was experiencing as a kid, and then intrusive thoughts. So I was having a lot of the kind of harm-based OCD, sexual intrusive thoughts, health anxiety, death anxiety, existential, or the whole suite from
the cornucopia.
The cornucopia, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's not many themes I haven't had a bit of. The odd one. I think sometimes my wife wishes that I had some of the ones that might make me pay more attention to the house and things. But obviously I don't want to minimize, obviously that's not what OCD is about. So I probably shouldn't make that joke as an OCD therapist. But yeah, no, so yeah, it was sort of a lot of panic and anxiety, and that set me off on a journey. I initially, they diagnosed me with epilepsy as a kid. They thought I had epilepsy because I was having the sort of panic disorder and the DPDR. Okay. I now don't view it that way myself. I think it was misdiagnosed sort of panic and OCD. And then, so I didn't go down the therapy. I mean, this was like late 80s, 90s, so CBT was not well known in the UK, in my world. So I did have a little bit of therapy, but I mean, it wasn't CBT, it was some hypnotherapy. It was designed to, relax me in panic, and wasn't very helpful, and sort of put me off the whole, going down that route, I guess. And then I went off down a traditional meditation sort of pathway where I was trying to meditate my way out of all these symptoms, which obviously wasn't helpful in the long run. And then eventually I came back, and as the internet came in, I must have, like many people, Googled the thoughts I was having, and eventually discovered the idea of intrusive thoughts, and I found John Hirschfield's books and some of those books, and then that kind of redirected me to CBT and ERP and those therapies. And then, what led me down the ACT path more was I had a number of rounds of ERP, which were, they were somewhat helpful, but I found, I guess the way I was applying it, I was trying to control the symptoms. I was trying to do, exposure to get rid of what I was going through. And of course that had not as good an effect really. It sort of jumped around, or it would go quiet for a bit and then pop back up and get strong again. And I think, at that point I was discovering ACT or rediscovering ACT because I'd read about it years earlier. And people that had used ACT together with ERP, and that just really resonated for me. I just thought, I've had this all my life. I've spent 30 years trying to control it, get away from it. I'm not going to be able to do that. So let's try this acceptance-based approach. And when I brought that into ERP, that was what was most helpful to me. So, I definitely, I resonate with that approach the most.
So that's what you do professionally now too, then? Within
ERP and ACT combined with compassion work as well.
Tell me more about the compassion side of it.
Yeah, so I guess because I'd been down the traditional meditation route, I had come across compassion meditation and a lot of the Buddhist practices, and I'd practiced them quite a lot. I mean, I was a very intense meditator. I practiced hours a day and did lots of retreats and was very, very into that. And I'd done a lot of compassion, and it always resonated for me. And then I discovered Paul Gilbert, the work of Paul Gilbert, who developed compassion-focused therapy, and just really connected with it. And then Kristin Neff and Chris Germer's work as well. And then at that point I was starting to get very disillusioned with the traditional approaches that I was doing. I was coming back to, well, not coming back, I was starting to get more interested in therapy. And in the UK, a lot of people do integrate compassion-focused therapy, including some of the top sort of ERP therapists, David Veal and Rob Wilson, people like that. They integrate CFT in. So it just started to land with me, and I found it very helpful because I'd been so hard on myself growing up. So I'd really seen myself, the main thing, I thought of myself as very fearful, and I was very ashamed of being like a coward, really, was how I was talking to myself. And so this idea of developing self-compassion just really resonated for me, and I found it incredibly helpful in my OCD journey.
Because OCD is not compassionate.
No.
It might be the least compassionate thing I've seen people have to deal with. So how do you balance the compassion for yourself versus the internal dialogue that OCD is throwing at you, which is not at all compassionate? Yeah,
I mean, I guess the way I see it is that we are starting off with the diffusion skill, so the ability to observe that dialogue and not react, and then in parallel we're developing a more compassionate voice, which is not reassuring. It's almost, to me, it's like two things in parallel. It's not really speaking to the OCD, it's speaking to, you know, the other difficulties I might be having, and coaching and motivating me to work on recovery, and, you know, to go into ERP and exposure work, or you know, to come to a conference like this and be around all these amazing professionals, and to be compassionate to myself if I don't come across exactly how I want to, or things like that. So I'm just using that internal self-talk a lot in a compassionate way. But I think you have to be careful that it's not starting to argue or reassure or sort of interact with the OCD, really.
Yeah, I was going to go there. How do you prevent it from becoming a ritual in and of itself?
Yeah, I think it's function, right? Anything can become a ritual. You know, obviously people can come into therapy. I mean, I just had someone did one session with me the other day, and he said, like, I do this as a reassurance thing. You know, I go to a therapist and you know, get a load of reassurance. And I think, you know, it's always function. So the function of compassion is not to answer the uncertainty or to get rid of the difficult thoughts. It's to build courage to face the difficulty and to move forward in life. So traditionally, compassion and courage are, you know, they're completely interlocked. And, you know, it's from the heart, and, you know, there's all kinds of metaphorical language going right back. So for me, it's not debating or even interacting with the OCD, really. It's more coaching and talking me through exposure work, through recovery work, and also dealing with the shame and the self-critic that may interact with OCD, and sometimes they're very fused together, or sometimes there's almost like a different voice. So and obviously watching out for things becoming repetitive, feeling like I need to do it all the time, versus, you know, this is something that's helpful for you know, my sense of self and who I am.
You said shame. I want to hold that one. But prior to that, we're here at the OCD Foundation conference.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear sometimes from people with OCD is, though I feel alone, I don't want to be around other people with OCD, because what if I catch their...
Yeah.
How do you respond to someone like that?
Well, I mean, I think we've all got to get to the point where, you know, that's not our fear. I mean, I work with people all day long that have all the same themes that I've had, and are telling me all the same sort of worries, and to me that's the ultimate exposure. But obviously that takes time to build up to that, and we can't do that. But yeah, I mean, I guess we've got to work at the principle level with OCD. So rather than the content, we're looking at the principle and getting ready to spot that as it kicks in at somewhere like this. If I hear someone telling me about, like, I went to the psychosis and OCD talk today, and, you know, I was imagining some of my clients with mental health OCD really, and some of the things today would have been incredibly triggering because of the ambiguity in the language and how someone with OCD would interpret that. So it's looking for those principles and being ready, you know, to apply your skills, whatever's happening, and you know, we want to get to the point where we want to actively go towards this ultimately. So in a way, so I guess it depends where you are on that journey. Some people, it might be too much and we need to pace ourselves and gradually build up, and then other people, you know, it might be just the right exposure to go towards this and face it.
Going back to the shame piece then, the DSM does not define shame as part of the definition of OCD, which I think is a mistake.
Yeah.
Because I think guilt and shame and disgust ought to be in there as well too.
Yeah.
How do the non-standard emotions and feelings play a role for you in the therapy that you do? So anything beyond anxiety or distress?
Yeah, it's a topic I'm passionate about because in my own experience of OCD, it hasn't always been anxiety. It's been shame, just doubt sometimes, like not an anxious doubt, but just a sort of cognitive doubt, dissociated, detached, numb, depressed. You know, I had a lot of existential OCD, and sometimes it would be very depressive. It wouldn't be very anxious. It would be very, you know, everything's meaningless, so we're all going to die, and, you know, there's no point in anything sort of thoughts. So, yeah, I've been onto that from the beginning because I think, you know, everyone really identifies it with anxiety, and of course that's very difficult for sufferers because you go, well, I'm not really anxious, and then I mustn't have OCD, and then the doubt's going off. So from an ACT perspective, we, you know, the skills that I was talking about earlier, we're applying them to every emotion. So exposure in ACT is, you know, organized contact with repertoire narrowing stimuli for the function of behavioral flexibility. So that's any stimuli, that's getting in touch with any difficult emotion and learning to be more flexible. So for me, you know, I'm psychoeducation for people around the different emotions that might be there. How do we apply the specific skill set we're using with those emotions, and being ready for the resistance that comes. So sometimes it's anxiety, and then, you know, the secondary spike or other ways of resistance where it's suddenly, you know, for me, I got good with the anxious part of my OCD, and then I got hit with a lot of depression, and it was a way of my mind pulling me back into mental compulsions of rumination. So I do a lot of work on resistance, like as we apply the technique, how's your mind going to resist, including emotions, including jumping around from intrusive thoughts to more feelings and more scanning, monitoring, checking feelings. And so, yeah, I do a lot of like mapping that out with people, and then how do we apply the same set of skills on all of those different feelings.
I'm glad you brought up depression, because obviously OCD doesn't normally just travel by itself. It brings a friend or a cousin along with it as well too. So what has been your role in dealing with people who have multiple conditions? You said trauma earlier too, so you've got all of those things. How do you approach an entire person and then make the clinical decisions about where do we start in treatment? What's the treatment to use for that? You know, what is your way of really approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a big part of assessment in the beginning and really understanding the formulation of all of that. And, you know, I'm very, you know, I believe in having this core relational foundation and this sort of deep connection with the client at the base of everything. So also talking with them about how they view that system and what they want to work on. So doing that shared formulation together and sort of looking at the function and balancing that against the pieces that might be getting in the way of, if we try to work on other stuff, there's no way we can do it if they're, you know, seriously depressed, or, you know, there's some other sort of difficulty there. So doing that collaborative formulation, identifying those targets together. And then with ACT, I mean, we really are using exactly the same skills on everything. So that's handy, it makes it sort of easier. And then, you know, the way I'm doing exposure, I mean, typically the clients I work with have often done a number of rounds of ERP already and are coming because they know I talk about ACT and they know that I integrate them. So we're then using those ACT skills within the exposure work. You know, so yeah, I guess it's really working in that formulation assessment, then the collaborative work to identify it, and then as we go in, checking in regularly and, you know, getting the feedback from the client. You know, do they feel we're working on the right thing against my own clinical judgment, and obviously checking when it's, oh, we're off ruminating about other problems in life that feel very important, but we kind of know that that's an avoidance. So keeping my mind on all of those sorts of pieces, but yeah, collaboratively and tracking it over time really, and then looking at how it's going, how the work's going, and what's tripping us up, and, you know, have we been off target in the OCD and actually there is trauma that hasn't been disclosed and needs to be worked on, or, you know, there's other things like that in place.
I describe sometimes the crisis of the week mentality as a way to avoid doing the actual ERP work or the session work of, hey, I know I was supposed to work on this week, but oh my gosh, guess what happened this week? And this is the now 4th or 5th week in a row that something like that has occurred. What do you do to keep people on track so that they are working their program?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've got informed consent going into it, so we've got agreement about, how we're going to work. And then my job is to identify that stuff and compassionately raise it to them and, see if they can understand that that's what's going on, see if I can get agreement on that. And of course, some people, you get complete agreement. They're like, oh yeah, I am doing that and that is an avoidance. And then other people not. And so I'm doing that dance between, how much does this, in ACT we talk about sometimes you have to dance in the dark before you lead to the light. So this idea of being in the empathy and validation to build enough connection to then move into, I guess it's like motivational interviewing or other sort of ideas of, doing a lot of empathy and validation because, I'm working with people that have, been called treatment resistant and other things like that. So sometimes, it's identifying it with them and seeing if they agree. If they don't, maybe switching on to relational work. So I do functional analytics, psychotherapy, and some of those methods to look at like what's going on relationally, and is that tripping us up from moving towards ERP? So it depends on the client, obviously. Fortunately, a lot of people with OCD agree. They're like, yeah, that is what's happening, and okay, we can catch it and try and use the skills in that moment on what's going on. So they're verbalizing the mental compulsions. If they agree to that, then we're practicing response prevention as we catch it and come back.
Functional analytic therapy, you've mentioned that too. Could you describe to everybody what that is as well?
Yeah, so functional analytic psychotherapy is a behavioral approach to relationship, and it really identifies two types of behavior. It identifies behavior that separates us from other people or behavior that connects us. And the therapy is about identifying those behaviors 1 and 2 and how they play out in the therapeutic relationship and then how they play out outside of it. Using the therapeutic relationship to shape behaviors that bring us together, that connect us. So getting a shared agreement, understanding with the person about what those CRB 1s and 2s, clinically relevant behaviors 1 and 2 are, and using the therapeutic relationship to shape and train those so that we can do more of that in our life. I think it's in other therapies, but I like the way they're so simple and direct in identifying that. And I find it very helpful when someone is stuck, they don't want to do ERP, maybe some of the ACT and skill-based stuff I'm doing isn't landing so much. Maybe there's a history of relational trauma and other things there. I found it useful as to approach those relational barriers to then circle back to ERP and ACT and things later.
How do you weave your own experience into the work you do with others? I could see it as potentially being a very motivating thing if somebody is stuck, that you can describe a story of your own life as well too. So how do you use that disclosure in there with people?
Yeah, I use it a lot. I know often people have come to me because I've told my story on Stuart's podcast and other places, and they
Stuart has a podcast? What? What?
Yeah, sorry, shouldn't have mentioned that. But yeah, so they've read the stuff I've written, or they've seen my YouTube work, or other places like that. So they're coming to me, and I always review with people at the end, what's been helpful in therapy or not, or what's been unhelpful. And almost always they say, you having this experience and sharing it with me and really getting what's going on has been the most helpful. So I do share that a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously judiciously and thinking about the function and is it helping them. I'm not just telling them something to sort of make myself all grandiose and I've done recovery and isn't this awesome. It's always with the function of, oh, you're being tripped up on this. Okay, actually I get that. And I had a period where I was trying to apply ERP and then my mind started resisting in this way, and this is what it was like and how I used it. And yeah, I think people really appreciate that. And ACT has this metaphor that the therapist and the client are on two mountains and we're both climbing our mountains, and I can look across and see your route and go, well, maybe you could go this way and maybe that would help. But equally, the client can see mine as well. And so there's a lot more with two shared humans suffering I haven't got life figured out and perfect, but yeah, I can hopefully offer some stuff that's helpful.
And why haven't you figured out life yet?
Yeah, well, I'm working with a real setback of 30 years of OCD, so maybe another 15 years I've got it, I'm sure.
In your own work with OCD, you have to share that, or it gets brought up in conversations, friends, family. One of my favorite questions to ask people who come on here who have OCD is, how do you deal with, once you've said that, the almost standard response of, oh, I have a little of that too?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I do try and address when I hear that, when people are minimizing, even though earlier I made a joke about that, but ignore that joke. I try and address that and share with people compassionately, because no one's going to learn if I storm on in there and say something very invalidating. But I do raise it. Actually, I raised it with one person once, and then they described, and they actually did have OCD, so it was the opposite.
Wow.
And it was helpful for them to identify it. But typically, I'm talking about that is not the same as OCD, and those stereotype subtypes aren't all the subtypes, and actually there are these other common ones, and sort of sharing from my own experience. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, a lot of people, if you talk to them about violent intrusive thoughts, sexual intrusive thoughts, existential, health, they're not going to really get that. Well, you can share it in a way that they would, but often people don't admit that they're having some of those thoughts themselves and things. So I judge it off the audience really, but I certainly try and catch when people are misusing those terms and try and educate where I can. But it happens in my family. I mean, I've got an extended family that, still, even though I've raised those things with them, they'll still make jokes about it. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, based in the US, you're in the UK, you're here at the OCD conference in Florida. Do you notice a difference between countries' perceptions of OCD or reactions to OCD, or even maybe more broadly, mental health in general?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been noticing a lot of differences in interpersonal styles between America and UK. We were joking about how the Brits will apologise and then apologise for apologising and apologising for apologising. And so I've noticed those sort of differences. I mean, I guess here I'm really seeing people who are open and compassionate about OCD, so having one view, but out and about, we've had people over here, things we're saying, and I think it's a range. I mean, I think UK is like America in that, there are so many different philosophies and perspectives that they're not one country, and there's just so it depends obviously what region you're in, and what level of understanding of mental health there is. In the UK, you can have in one place huge compassion and understanding for any mental health disorder and real respect, and in other places people are still like thinking it's a weakness, or they're judging people, they're thinking that there's something dangerous in it or things like that. And I think it feels similar over here, right? There's such a difference in how people respond to it.
When you're doing treatment and someone comes on and maybe they have a subtype that's similar to you, how do you as a therapist, and this goes to all the therapists watching this, how do you as a therapist protect yourself from being triggered? Or can it be triggering at times in a session?
Well, I use my ACT skills all the time, all day long.
Okay. Good.
So, I don't find that to be an issue. I don't mind if I have intrusive thoughts during therapy, or anxious or other feelings. Like, I'm trying to practice what I preach and hopefully share that to people. So it isn't an issue for me, and I like it actually. I think it's a great opportunity, and then I can share that I've had the same subtype, and that's very validating. And I think with very taboo subtypes, it's it makes it a lot easier for someone to talk to you about pedophile OCD or sexual orientation OCD or something else like that, if they know you've had the same thoughts or same experiences at times. So yeah, I find it, I mean, I practice I use my skills all the time in therapy because I'm having reactions. So I'm not sort of triggered in the sense of OCD, but I'm certainly having reactions like anyone all the time, and I'm trying to use those reactions. So if I'm very moved by someone's story, then I'm feeling that sadness and that kind of love, really, that openness and love and connection, and then I'm sharing that with them, you know, and so I'm seeing my reaction as a part of the therapy process that I'm using my skills with all the time.
Tell me about the clinic work that you've done with Stu.
Yeah, so we set up the Integrative Center for OCD. I met Stu at one of his meetups for OCD Stories quite a few years ago now, and I was doing better in my recovery at that time, but I didn't know anyone that had OCD, and I wanted to meet other people that did. And so I went there, and actually Stu and I connected. We both had similar interests. We both skateboarded when we were younger, and other sort of interests. You can see the scar on my arm to prove it. So we connected, and then we were both going through our therapy training as well. So we stayed in touch, and then as we qualified, we did peer supervision together. And then both of our practices were growing, and we had wait lists, and we had both had the long-term idea of doing this. Doing a centre, and we just started talking about it and thinking it would be good. And we felt in the UK that there is excellent CBT and ERP, and the NHS can have wonderful therapy. It's really at a place where wait lists can be 2 years and other things in certain areas, and it can be really, really difficult. And then private therapy, there is some really good private therapy, but we felt there was a space for another centre to do that, really, and we were passionate about this foundation of ERP, but integrating these other therapy modalities that we found useful into it. So acceptance and commitment therapy, compassion-focused approaches, functional analytics, psychotherapy, other things like this. And so we also felt, I was hearing a lot of stories from clients where they hadn't felt, they might have worked with a therapist who'd been really high expertise, but they hadn't felt really a lot of empathy and validation. It felt more like a lesson. People said to me that it was like a teacher, or even patronizing at times. And so we wanted to really do something that had compassion at the foundation, and was a lot more focused on the whole person as well as the OCD. So the whole person in the sense that someone can do ERP therapy and then they're doing better with their OCD symptoms, but they're dealing with the grief of all the time lost. They're dealing with thoughts of like, I don't know what I like because I've been struggling with OCD all my life, or the impact on relationships from OCD and other things that might need working through, and disconnection from values really in other areas. So we wanted to do something that was also focusing on that side of the person as well.
I've seen some younger people recently who are really mourning the loss of those years to OCD, and it's actually starting to get in the way of their progressing. How do you motivate somebody to move on from that and not ruminate about that?
Yeah, I think, again, my experience is helpful because I get it. I lost 30 years to this, or slightly over that. ACT has this idea of workability. So how does my behavioral responses play out in the long run? Do they take me towards my values and goals, or do they take me away? So for me, the grief is an important thing to have felt and to brought compassion to, but if it goes into rumination and we're stuck at that level, then from my own experience, that was so unhelpful, and actually almost like another OCD spike or resistance. So I talked through with people how I experienced that, and how that almost was like I was not responding to OCD in one sense, and then grief coming in compulsively, or not really grief, but resentment and rumination under the cloak of grief was coming in. And so how to work with that, how to use the same skills on that. And for me, a lot of validation that of course you feel like this. This is such a devastating mental health difficulty, and it can rip people's lives apart. And yet if we stay stuck in that cycle, it's going to take more time and more years from you, and it disempowers you from the strength you have to face this and to build a new life. And I also feel passionately that when I built real acceptance for the difficulty I was going through, and then started to focus in the present moment on building a new life and doing things that I never thought I would, like having a family and becoming a therapist and things like that, then the past did decrease. I mean, I can still touch the pain of it, I can still feel that, and I often do compassion for my younger self practices. I can certainly feel that pain, but for me it's so helpful not to be stuck in that rumination and to move forward. So I try and use that, but it's tough, right? People can really get in that pain.
It is tough, and I don't know, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, I don't know that we've talked about grief enough in OCD, and grief over the loss of some of the life one maybe wanted to live due to the interference of the OCD in that life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some amazing advocates talking about this now. I mean, Chrissy comes to mind, Chrissy Hodges, is talking a lot about grief, and you go out there in the community and people are talking about grief, but whether it's made its way into the treatment approaches enough, I'm sure there are lots of skillful therapists that are, really paying attention to that. But I think probably, as a guiding principle for everyone, it doesn't feel like it's there. And, I've heard some horror stories, to be honest, where therapists have really gone, really said invalidating things around grief and almost victim blamed the person who's stuck in it. So, obviously some people aren't getting the message about grief.
Yeah, that's a shame. So that's why I think conferences are important, where you can educate people. Good content. These podcasts are so important to hear from you, someone with both the lived experience and the therapeutic experience as well, to know that there are outs to some of these things, right? There are ways to help people move forward to them, and shaming them or being angry that, oh, your emotion is getting in the way of my therapy is not going to really be helpful in a situation.
Yeah, exactly.
To give you just more of a funny thing here for a moment.
Okay.
If OCD was an ice cream flavor, what flavor would it be?
Wow. I'd probably be going back and forth. Is it vanilla? Is it chocolate? Is it raspberry? Is it vanilla? Is it chocolate? Is it raspberry? Yeah, the initial reaction is something with a lot of disgust and something quite scary, but I also like to not view my OCD that way.
Sure.
To view it more compassionately. So probably, I wouldn't be able to answer what ice cream it is.
It would be the
yeah.
Okay,
The
wow.
doubting one.
Did not go where I thought it was. I like that one. But that's a fascinating way to actually think about it, that could you actually choose if given a choice? How has OCD interfered with your ability to make choices and to be confident in the choices you've made?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, the sheer distress and pain of it meant, I was just building my whole life around it. It was making the choices for me. Then as I got better, I mean, I'm really very analytical in my compulsions, and I could just ruminate and go back and forth. And I remember one day I was walking for a couple of hours and I was just going back and forth about whether I should do kettlebell or gym training or fitness and it was like OCD completely around that, and that sticks with me, and it was just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I had loads of that sort of showing up where I wasn't on my main themes of existential OCD or something else. It would then switch to just what's the right decision, what's the right, I mean, now I loved all the stuff I heard at the conference about you've just best to make a decision and just choose, and a lot of the decisions we're doing that. I mean, did it matter whether I did kettlebell or gym training or walking or something else? I mean, it didn't matter, because I wasn't trying to be a powerlifter or bodybuilder or professional athlete. I could have just chosen anything. So bringing that attitude of like, if I catch that feeling, I mean, it comes with that sort of anxious urgency to analyze. If I catch that, okay, step back from that and just choose and act.
To me, then, there's two words that really summarize a lot of this. And I want to know how these two words have impacted your life. And they are, what if?
Yeah. I mean, I also think there was other obsessions I had. So a lot of my OCD was what if, but I also had you are, or this is, or these. So I always like to get that message in that often I'd be on what if, sometimes for decades. and then it would flip to "you are" or "this is," or more command or a statement, or it would switch from verbal thoughts to images or sensations or other things. So just to get the complexity of it. But yeah, I mean, my mind has done what if, for as long as I've been thinking about it. I mean, I noticed it today. We won on the slide in the pool, and I noticed my mind right away going, what if you knock yourself out on this, and then you injure yourself somehow, you embarrass yourself somehow. So that it was there, but I just observed that thought and went for the slide and enjoyed it. So, and it was great. It was really good fun. So my mind doesn't know. I've learned to realize my mind knows very little.
What a great example then too. You don't have to be stopped by a what if.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It can be what if and move on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And one thing that I like to say to people, and kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, accept and move on as well too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd say that's the key of what I'm all about, yeah.
There are people watching this out there who are suffering now with OCD, who are like what you were 30 years ago. What's your advice for them?
The advice is obviously seek treatment, seek specialist OCD treatment. I would say try to form connection as well, try to meet other people that have OCD and to feel that you're not alone with this. If you find that a therapist does not have the understanding, does not understand all the things that Patrick and NOCD are talking about on the podcast, then look around, advocate for yourself and find the right therapist that does ERP. And if ERP isn't helpful in its purest form, there are other approaches, but make sure the person has understanding of ERP and is integrating those other approaches in. And keep going, stay determined, you can recover, and there are many people out there that have done that, and hear some of those stories. I mean, that was huge for me, was actually hearing other people that had done it, had got into a good place with their acceptance and their values-based behavior, getting their life back, and learn from those people and let that inspire you.
One final thing, just because you've been through treatment, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised that some of the initial treatments weren't all that helpful, right? Like you had talked about, we didn't have the knowledge-based, the evidence-based aspects. CBT in the UK might have been behind what it was even in the US, as you described too. Now, looking at the therapy that you do, tell us about what the importance is of an evidence-based treatment for helping someone.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the therapy I had, it was later in my journey, the CBT, and it was with very competent, very skilled clinicians, world-renowned people. So they were excellent at what they did. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to build our approaches around an evidence-based philosophy, but also understanding the limitations of that. And this is really apparent to me because, I mean, every week I'm being contacted by people that have had ERP, often with very reputable places that are still struggling. So, I'm seeing that subgroup of people that it hasn't been so helpful for. And often I'm finding it's the mental compulsion side of it. Even people who really understand mental compulsions, there's still no systematic approach to working with that I'm seeing. So I think it's got to be built around the evidence-based foundation, but we've got to keep our minds open. And I was hearing the great John Abramovich really being the example of this, of someone who is incredible at ERP and so knowledgeable and research, but has kept his mind open to other approaches as they've shown enough promise. And to me, that was very inspiring. I think we can get, we can all find our way. I think sometimes, because we use evidence-based approaches, we can discount where they're not landing for people because we know they work so well for a large amount of people. And I'm very passionate about listening to those people that it doesn't work for and learning from them actually as well.
Yeah. What do you hope 25 years from now your career has looked like?
I hope that our center has helped many thousands of people. I hope that I've done my small part in using my pain to help other people and to share what's been helpful for me and what I see helpful with other people that have recovered. And I always have the goal, if I can do nothing with someone, can I at least improve their self-compassion a few degrees? So if I put more compassion in the world over that period, then I'll be happy.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the fact that you're here. You've traveled all this way to come to this conference and had some time with us. It means a lot. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you. A real honor to be on the podcast. And yeah, it's great. Love it.
Awesome. And thank you for watching the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you're looking for information on OCD, check us out at NOCD.com. And if you want more of the Get to Know OCD podcast, subscribe on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.